On the morning of April 20th, 2012, the Tucson sun hadn't yet turned harsh. In the small house on East 12th Street, Becky Celis adjusted the straps on her youngest daughter Isabel's backpack before sending her out the door. Just a short walk, a few familiar blocks to her elementary school, a route Isabel had taken hundreds of times. When the little girl's figure finally disappeared behind the trees, Becky turned back into the kitchen to make breakfast for her two older boys. About an hour later, the school called, "Isabel hasn't arrived for class." The words made Becky's knees go weak. In the days that followed, Tucson became a city plastered with flyers, white and red banners, and lines of volunteers combing the desert south and the dry wash. Police searched door to door, K-9 units sniffed through alleys, helicopters circled the southern Arizona skies. But every trail stopped cold at the corner of East 12th Street and South Campbell Avenue, as if Isabel had simply vanished into thin air. 8 years passed. The kitchen table now held nothing but a stack of bills. Becky kept paying for private investigators, maintaining her daughter's missing persons website, printing new flyers, each one showing Isabel's face just a little older. Yet deep down, she had never stopped believing her little girl was still somewhere out there. Until that morning in June 2020, when the phone rang as she sat sipping her cold coffee, displaying an unfamiliar number from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. A man's voice came over the line, slow but heavy. "Mrs. Celis. This is Detective Raul Moreno. I need you to come to South Drexel Road right away. A team of electricians discovered something that we believe belonged to Isabel." Becky froze, gripping the phone so tightly her fingertips turned white. She whispered, "My little girl, my baby," before finally saying aloud, "I'm on my way." Then she bolted out the door, keys icy in her palm, her heart pounding like the blare of search sirens 8 years earlier. South Drexel Road was a dusty stretch cutting through the desolate southern edge of Tucson, where the sun-baked desert was overgrown with weeds and scattered cacti. When Becky Celis pulled up, the midday sun was already casting long shadows across the scrub. Police tape cordoned off the narrow lane leading to the abandoned house, where a crew of electricians stood in the shade, tense and silent. 2 patrol cars blocked the driveway, red and blue lights flashing across the cracked, faded walls of the building. Becky slammed the brakes just short of the tape, nearly hitting a traffic cone, and jumped out. The smell of hot earth and gasoline rose around her, but she didn't notice. All she saw was the chipped house number, 7210, and a tall officer stepping toward her. "Mrs. Celis?" he called, his deep voice steady. Becky nodded, breath coming in short bursts. "Raul Moreno, Pima County Sheriff's Department. I'm the one who called." He offered his hand, but Becky ignored it, her gaze locked on the front door, where forensic techs moved in and out in disposable suits, their faces unreadable. Is it her?" Becky asked, her voice trembling so much Moreno frowned and leaned closer. "We can't say for certain yet," he said slowly. "But what we found in the crawlspace matches what Isabel was wearing when she disappeared. The pink princess backpack, and—" Becky didn't hear the rest. She was already striding, almost running, toward the cracked front steps. Moreno caught up, gently catching her arm. "Wait. This is an active crime scene. You'll need gloves, booties." A young female officer pressed a pair of latex gloves and disposable covers into Becky's hands. She fumbled them on, her fingers shaking, then drew a deep breath. "This way," Moreno said, leading her around the side of the house. The sun beat down on the exposed foundation, where the settling earth had left gaps in the concrete blocks. A narrow crawlspace hatch stood open, revealing a dark void beyond. Becky's stomach lurched as she crouched to look inside. Moreno ducked in first, flashlight beam cutting across the hard-packed dirt.
The light landed dans un filtimètre, torn and stand dark in place.
Beside it lay a heavy chain looped around a support post, its padlock hanging loose and rusted. In the corner, slumped in dust, was a pink princess backpack, one Becky recognized instantly. She herself had sewn the fraying strap back together the day before Isabel vanished. Then her eyes fell on a crumpled scrap of green and yellow striped fabric on the mattress. The very shirt Isabel had worn that morning, ironed and folded the night before. Still faintly creased. Becky reached for it, her fingers trembling, but Moreno's hand stopped her. "Don't. Mrs. Celis, we need to preserve the scene. The lab is already pulling DNA." "How long?" Becky whispered, almost pleading. Moreno looked at her, regret flickering in his eyes. Days, maybe weeks. But, he hesitated, choosing his words. The evidence suggests she stayed here for a long time. The mattress, the bottles, there are signs she lived here. Weeks. Maybe months. A strangled sob escaped Becky as she sank to her knees, both hands clamped over her mouth to keep from screaming. Around her, the forensic team paused, silent. Moreno rested a hand on her shoulder, but said nothing more. All she could see was the tiny, dark crawlspace. The cold dirt. The dusty backpack. The striped shirt she'd ironed. Her little girl had been here all those years, less than 15 miles away. She rose slowly, wiped her face, and stood straighter. As she stepped back out into the harsh sunlight, Becky cast one last glance at the house and murmured, low but fierce, just loud enough for Moreno to hear. I'll find whoever did this. I swear. The next day, Becky Celis barely slept. She spent the night at her kitchen table, thumbing through old photos of Isabel. Her daughter's big, defiant 6-year-old eyes stared into the camera, freckles on her nose forming that familiar little triangle Becky had kissed 1,000 times. At dawn, Becky drove back toward downtown Tucson. She stopped at the post office to ask about mail addressed to Riverside Realty. The company name detectives had found on the lease of the South Drexel house, but the clerk just shook his head. The company had dissolved years ago. On her way home, she slowed as she passed a familiar Chevron station on South Park Avenue. Inside, Becky stood in line to pay for gas when her eyes locked onto him. At the counter was an older man, slightly stooped, white hair, voice oddly familiar as he chatted with the cashier. He wore a pressed, faded blue shirt and held a paper bag with strawberry ice cream and a small gas canister.
Becky froze.
It was Harold Walsh, the former crossing guard who used to help children cross at Isabel's school corner. He'd once attended the prayer vigils, printed thousands of missing posters out of his own pocket. But why was he here, so far from their old neighborhood, and why was he, traveling with a teenage girl? Becky's gaze flicked to the window. In an aging RV parked at Pump 5, a girl sat at the dinette table, head down. She looked 14, maybe 15. Her blonde ponytail hung loose around her shoulders, her faded blue t-shirt clung to her thin frame. She was spooning strawberry ice cream from a tub and scratching her left elbow.
Becky est brisiched.
On the pale skin of that elbow, an angry red rash was spreading. She stepped slowly outside, leaning against a gas pump, eyes locked on the girl. That rash, in that exact spot, was burned into her memory. Isabel had been allergic to strawberries. Always at her left elbow, the doctor had called it localized contact dermatitis, rare and unique. She swallowed hard, fingers gripping the cold metal. Harold emerged, spotting her. His face faltered just a moment before forcing a stiff smile. Becky, he said, shifting the paper bag. Good to see you. I heard about the discovery yesterday. I'm very sorry. Becky didn't answer, just stared at him, then passed him to the girl in the RV. Harold stepped sideways, blocking her view, his knuckles white around the bag. My niece, he said quickly. She's shy. Doesn't like strangers. We need to get going. He turned and hurried to the RV, shouting something to the girl. Becky called out, her voice cracking, Isabel. The girl turned her head in that instant, startled. Her big brown eyes widened, and the freckles in that unmistakable little triangle caught the light. Isabel. Becky screamed, lunging forward. But Harold was already slamming the door, shoving the bag aside as he jammed the key in the ignition. The Winnebago roared to life, belching black smoke. Becky heard tires screech as he floored it, the gas hose snapping loose with a metallic whine. She stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes glued to the road where the RV hurtled north. Just before it disappeared, she caught sight of Harold's face in the rearview mirror, not pitying, not sympathetic anymore but terrified. Becky fumbled for her phone, punching in Detective Raul Moreno's direct line. Her voice shook but came out sharp. I saw her. Harold Walsh. He has her.
Hervé.
Off-white. Arizona plates. I'll text you the number.
Heading north.
Stop him. Don't let him get away again. There was only a beat of silence before Moreno's voice sharpened on the other end. Copy that. Stay put. Do not follow. Repeat, do not follow. We'll get him this time. Becky clutched the phone tighter, her eyes still fixed on the fading plume of dust on the road. Under her breath, she swore to herself.
You won't take her from me again.
Not this time. Never again. Becky stood frozen outside the gas station for a long moment, her eyes locked on the stretch of road where Harold's Winnebago had vanished. Only when the wail of sirens rose faintly to the north did she finally turn back to her car, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened, willing herself not to follow. A string of patrol cars and Pima County Sheriff's SUVs roared past in a cloud of dust, led by Detective Moreno's silver sedan. As his car drew even with hers, he rolled down the window, radio in hand, gave her a quick firm nod. Stay put. We'll call you. Becky's phone stayed in her lap, her eyes tracking the flashing lights until they disappeared onto the northbound stretch of I-10. In her mind, she kept seeing her daughter's face. Older now, unfamiliar in some ways, but still carrying the terrified, pleading look she'd never forgotten. The convoy tore down the edge of the desert, past cholla cactus and low mesquite. Moreno kept a steady speed, eyes fixed on the fading white shape ahead in the far right lane. We've got eyes on the Winnebago. Northbound on Highway 77. Looks like he's searching for a turnoff, a deputy's voice crackled over the radio. Don't spook him, Moreno replied. Keep your distance. Wait for him to stop at the RV park before we move in. Up ahead, the sprawling KOA Tucson/Lazy Days RV park came into view, with neat rows of motorhomes and strings of American flags fluttering in the hot breeze. Through his windshield, Moreno watched Harold's RV signal and turn in slowly, tires crunching over gravel as a park attendant stepped out to jot down the license plate. Moreno signaled, and the patrol cars cut their sirens, idling outside the gate for another minute before creeping forward. They fanned out, one team circling to block the rear service exit, another hugging the main road. When Moreno's car rolled to a stop, he lowered his window and called Becky. We've got him contained. He's inside Koa Park, he said quickly. Do you hear me? Stay there. Don't come here. We'll bring her out safe. On the other end, Becky's voice was thin and choked. Please, don't let him disappear again. Not this time, Moreno promised. Inside the RV park, Harold's Winnebago sat tucked into a shady corner lot near a thicket of mesquite trees. A familiar blue tarp was strung up over one side, and the main door stood ajar, the curtain inside swaying gently. Moreno advanced across the gravel, signaling his team to spread out, Glock steady in his hands, eyes fixed on the door. He took a breath and called out, his voice carrying across the park, Harold Walsh. This is Detective Raul Moreno. You're surrounded.
Come out now, en up, move slow. Allons, chilling silence.
Only the dry rustle of leaves and the faint squeak of a trailer will somewhere nearby. Then Harold's voice came from inside, shaky but defiant. You don't understand, she's mine. I've cared for her, 8 years, you can't take her from me. Moreno kept his tone calm, firm. We don't want anyone hurt. Open the door.
Let the girl go.
We can talk. I promise.
A sob.
Then the door swung open. Harold stepped out first, disheveled and wild-eyed, clutching the girl's arm. Isabel, or Sarah as she still believed, stood trembling, her face streaked with mascara and tears, her body stiff with fear. Moreno saw it immediately, the unmistakable constellation of freckles on her nose, her big brown eyes wide with terror. He lowered his gun slightly, extending his free hand. Sarah, you're safe now. Walk toward me. We'll help you. The girl's eyes darted between him and Harold, then locked on Harold, who tightened his grip, shouting, She's mine. I saved her. You can't. Then, in an instant, the girl wrenched free and bolted toward the line of officers. Get her. Moreno shouted. 2 deputies lunged forward, wrapping her in a blanket, pulling her out of reach. Harold staggered, then lunged after her, but Moreno fired his taser. The prongs struck him square, his body seizing up as he dropped to the gravel, gasping and muttering, She's mine, she's mine. Officers swarmed him, cuffing his hands behind his back, hauling him to his knees. Isabel stood wrapped in the blanket, clutching the hand of a young female officer, her voice breaking, I want to go back, to him. Moreno exhaled, his chest heaving, staring at Harold being dragged away, then glancing back at the girl, that fragile mix of innocence and horror forever etched into his memory. Across town, Becky Celis' phone rang. She answered on the first ring. Moreno's voice was low but steady. We got her out. She's safe. You can head to the hospital now. The phone slipped from Becky's hands as she covered her face, laughing and crying at the same time.
I'm coming, Mama is coming, baby.
That morning, the children's clinics on Grant Road buzzed with its usual rhythm, but room 214 on the third floor was sealed off. Becky Celis hurried down the polished hallway, her heart hammering, clutching an old photo of Isabel in her hand. Through the small window in the door, she could see her daughter sitting on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and guarded. Even with her dyed blonde hair and fuller figure, Becky still saw those eyes, and that familiar constellation of freckles on her nose. But when Becky pushed open the door and stepped inside, Isabel recoiled instantly, clutching the blanket tighter and shouting, "No! I want him! I want him!" Her voice was sharp. "My name is Sarah Walsh. He's all I have. He loves me. Why is everyone lying? My mother is dead." Becky staggered, her lips trembling. "No, baby, it's me. Mommy's here."
He never left you.
A nurse touched Becky's arm gently, shaking her head, whispering, "She needs time. She's believed his story for 8 years. It's deep." Becky backed away, her heart tearing as she watched the girl turn her face to the window, muttering to herself, "I just want to see him." At that same moment, in an interrogation room at the Pima County Sheriff's Department on West Ina Road, Harold Walsh sat slumped in his chair, wrists cuffed, his blue shirt rumpled and stained with dust. Detective Raul Moreno sat opposite him, thick case file in hand. Harold wouldn't meet his eyes, his voice hoarse. "I raised her. I cared for her. I taught her to read. I taught her to sing. I was her family." Moreno shot back, "You kidnapped her. You locked her away for 8 years. You brainwashed her into calling you grandpa. You made her forget her real mother." Harold slammed his palm on the table, his eyes blazing. "I saved her.
You don't understand.
She was left alone, abandoned. If I hadn't stepped in, she would have died." Moreno leaned forward steady, then explained the cash envelopes sent to Riverside Realty every quarter. "Whose name was on them? You were just the caretaker, weren't you?" Harold hesitated. His lips moved, barely above a whisper. "Dennis." Moreno scribbled immediately, full name.
Denny Harper, Harold Spat, his voice bitter.
He was the boss. He rented the house. He paid. I just watched her. I didn't dare say no. He said if I ever spoke up, he'd hurt her. He liked making me teach her to call him uncle. But he rarely came by.
Juste cache Truzmel.
I just followed orders. Moreno leaned back in his chair, his eyes hardening. He motioned to the deputy outside, "Get on the phone with the FBI. Trace Dennis Harper. Tucson, Arizona.
Start with Riverside Realty Record.
Dig deep." Harold hung his head, almost whispering, "I just wanted her with me. She was all I had." Moreno stood, his voice like steel. "You'll have plenty of time to think about that in prison. But we'll find this man. And he won't get away with it." That night, Becky returned to the hospital, this time only standing outside the glass window. Isabel was asleep, her small hand clutching the edge of the blanket. A nurse approached, slipping Becky a slip of paper neatly written, "Dennis Harper, suspect. Last known address, North Campbell Avenue, Tucson." Becky stared at the name, took a deep breath, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her pocket. She murmured under her breath, like a vow, "He'll pay for all of it." The hospital's neon light caught her reflection in the glass, exhausted, hollow-eyed, but with a fire burning in her eyes, the fire of a mother who would not stop. At the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the lights stayed on through the night. Detective Raul Moreno hunched over his desk, a stack of Riverside Realty records in front of him, lease agreements, tax forms, and the cash-stuffed envelopes Harold had confessed to. All of them list the payer as D. Harper, said the FBI agent across from him, his voice weary. "We ran his business records. Dennis Harper used to be CEO of Riverside Realty, Tucson, before the company folded in 2016. Last registered address on North Campbell Avenue is now an empty apartment." Moreno drummed his fingers on the table, speaking slowly, "And after 2016? The agent shook his head. "No tax returns. No bank accounts. No phone lines. He dropped off the grid, except for the cash envelopes." A young staffer rushed in, handing over a fax, from the currency tracking unit. Recent mailings all originated.
Las Vegas, Nevada.
Moreno gripped the paper, his eyes darkening. Las Vegas, of course. Becky Celis didn't wait to be told. The moment she learned Dennis Harper had fled Tucson, she marched straight into the sheriff's office, standing in the doorway of Moreno's office, her voice hard. I'm going with you.
Moreno shook his head slowly. No.
This is a federal operation now. The FBI will handle it. You're not permitted at the scene. Becky clenched her purse, her eyes shimmering with tears but unyielding. He destroyed my family. I need to see him in cuffs.
With my own eyes.
Moreno stayed silent for a long moment. Then he gave her a faint nod. 3 days later, at a dingy roadside motel on the edge of Las Vegas Boulevard, the FBI surrounded Room 17, where security cameras had caught Dennis Harper entering the night before. He looked gaunt, unshaven, but his eyes still held that same cold gleam that had kept Harold in line all those years.
Becky stood just behind the line of black FBI SUVs, rapidine à light jacket against the desert chill.
Her heart pounded as she heard the loudspeaker. Dennis Harper.
This is the FBI.
Open the door immediately. Hands where we can see them.
Silence.
Then a crash.
The door flew open.
3 agents stormed in, dragging a man out of the shadows and slamming him face down on the asphalt of the parking lot. Becky held her breath when their eyes met. He was no longer the powerful executive of Riverside Realty, now just a filthy animal muttering, I didn't do anything wrong. She was better off with me. They deserved to lose her. An agent hauled him upright, cuffed his hands, and recited clearly, Dennis Harper, you are under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, child abuse, and federal crimes with aggravating circumstances. You have the right to remain silent. Becky stepped closer to the tape, stopping just at the edge, her eyes blazing as he was marched past. Harper glanced at her, sneering faintly, but the sneer faltered when she hissed just loud enough for him to hear. You'll rot in a cell. And my daughter will live. I swear. He was shoved into the back of the FBI truck, the door slamming shut. The convoy rolled out, sirens wailing, red and blue lights flashing across the Vegas night. Becky stood there, watching until the last car was gone. A young FBI agent approached her gently, speaking softly, he'll be extradited back to Tucson tonight. You can meet with the prosecutors tomorrow morning. Becky just nodded, her gaze lifting to the neon glow of the city skyline, gaudy mocking. But inside her, for the first time in 8 years, another kind of light began to flicker. Dim, but strong enough to make her stand tall. Justice had finally begun. The following March, the Pima County Courthouse opened the trial of Dennis Harper. Tucson seemed to hold its breath. The hallway outside the courtroom was packed with reporters, cameras flashing, old posters of Isabel's 6-year-old face taped to the walls. Becky walked through them with her chin held high, still clutching the framed photo of her daughter, the same photo she'd carried through 8 years of hell. Inside, the jury sat in silence as the judge banged his gavel. When Dennis Harper was brought in, clad in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled, his face hollow yet his eyes still cold and defiant, Becky didn't flinch. She sat straight-backed at the victim's table, her sharp gaze never leaving him. The prosecutor stood, his opening words ringing clear, Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Today, we are here to deliver justice for a little girl stolen from her parents. Locked away, lied to, stripped of 8 years of her childhood, by this man, Dennis Harper. Piece by piece, the evidence was laid out. Photos of the South Drexel Crawlspace, Isabel's clothes and pink backpack, DNA samples from the mattress, Harper's fingerprints on the chain and the taped Hello Kitty poster, the cash-stuffed letters in his handwriting, and Harold Walsh's full confession. Becky sat motionless, her hand tightening on the table each time Isabel's name was spoken. She didn't look away when Harold was brought in as a witness, his head bowed, his voice cracking, he paid me. He told me to keep her, to make her forget her parents, to call him uncle. I just did what he said. I'm sorry. Later, Harper's defense lawyer tried in vain. My client only wanted to protect her. He didn't harm her. He gave her a home her real parents couldn't. But the jury was unmoved. After just 2 hours of deliberation, they returned unanimously, guilty. The judge's gavel came down. Dennis Harper is hereby sentenced to 120 years in prison, without parole. Harper was led away, his eyes flicking toward Becky, and for the first time she saw fear there. She didn't move, just watched until he disappeared behind the steel door. The next day, Becky visited the jail, standing before the glass of the inmate visiting room. Harold Walsh, now frail in his striped jumpsuit, sat holding the phone, his eyes dull. Becky didn't sit. She leaned close to the speaker, her voice like ice. "You stole my daughter from me. You destroyed her childhood. But you gave up his name. For that, you'll live longer than he will.
Think about what you've done.
Every day. In that cell." Harold lowered his head, saying nothing. Becky replaced the receiver, turned, and walked out without looking back. That afternoon, Becky drove to the hospital. Isabel was in her therapy room, quietly sketching. When Becky stepped in, the girl froze, her eyes still wary. But this time, she didn't completely shy away. Becky sat down beside her without a word, gently helping fill in the outlines on her drawing. After a long silence, Isabel spoke, barely audible. "Is he caught?" Becky smiled faintly, her eyes wet. "Yes, sweetheart. And he'll never hurt anyone again." The girl lowered her head, her pencil trembling on the page. Becky placed her hand over her daughter's, softly. And for the first time in 8 years, Isabel didn't pull away.
Outside the window, the Tucson sunset painted the sky d'un brillant amber.
Becky looked at her daughter and whispered, unsure if the girl even heard. "I promise. I'm staying. Whether you remember or not. Whether you call me Mom or not."
Et elle be here.
And Isabel's eyes lifted, just enough to meet hers. 2 months after the trial, the therapy room at children's clinics had become Becky's second home. Isabel still refused to leave the hospital. She chose to stay where psychologists were close by, where everything was orderly and predictable. Becky didn't push. She had learned to wait, to slow her pace, to listen carefully to each fragile word from her daughter, words that still felt like they belonged to someone else, wounded and unfamiliar. That day, Becky brought a small cardboard box. Inside was the doll Isabel had carried everywhere during her first years of elementary school, the doll Becky had left untouched in her daughter's room all those years. She placed it on the table, gently sliding it toward Isabel. The girl glanced at it, her eyes dropping to the doll before turning away. But 5 minutes later, Becky noticed her hand resting lightly on the doll's dress. Just that. A small gesture, but enough to bring tears to Becky's eyes. A few weeks later, the therapist called Becky into the consultation room. Sitting across from her, he spread open a thick file. "We call this a form of Stockholm Syndrome in children." She wasn't just brainwashed. She developed a warped attachment to her captor, to the point of rejecting her real parents. But we're beginning to see small signals. Tiny ones. But hopeful. Becky clasped her hands. She asked quietly, "Does she still call him Grandpa?" The doctor shook his head. "Yesterday, she called him Harold." Becky smiled through tears. That night, Becky returned to the old house on East 12th Street. Isabel's room was just as she had left it. Tiny dresses hung neatly, her daughter's drawings still tacked to the wall. Becky walked to the desk, straightening a workbook, smoothing the cover with her palm. From her purse, she pulled out a new photo, Isabel in therapy, hair still blonde but eyes less afraid, her face softened slightly. Becky placed the photo on the desk, next to one of Isabel at 6. She whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." One afternoon, Becky walked Isabel through the hospital garden. The Tucson spring sun was warm and golden, cactus flowers blooming red along the fence. Isabel followed carefully, still looking uncertain. Becky said little, simply holding out her hand for the girl to choose. And then, in that sunny courtyard, Isabel suddenly grabbed her hand. Saying nothing.
Needing no word.
Becky stood still, staring at the sky, her hands trembling as she whispered into the breeze, "My little girl, you finally came back." That night, Becky returned home, closing Isabel's bedroom door behind her and leaning against the wall.
Through the window, she watched the soft yellow streetlight glint on the Quai Street.
For the first time in 8 years, she dared to crack open the window, letting the night air rush in. She knew there was still a long road ahead. She knew there would be tears, anger, painful memories. But today, when her daughter chose to hold her hand, Becky understood. Isabel had chosen to come home. And this time, Becky would never let go again. A year after Dennis Harper's conviction, the little house on East 12th Street finally glowed with light again. Spring had come to Tucson, soft breezes, white cactus flowers blooming along the fence. Isabel was home. Her room had been repainted, but everything else remained as it had been. The old doll sat neatly on the shelf next to the photo of her at 6 years old, all wide-eyed innocence. Now 15, Isabel's hair had begun to return to its natural dark brown, only faint streaks of blonde left clinging to the ends. There were still nights when she woke in a sweat, her voice breaking as she cried, "Grandpa, don't leave me," and Becky would silently pull her close, whispering, "No, baby. It's me."
You're safe now.
Isabel started back to school, just a few classes a week. On her first day, Becky waited in the parking lot the entire morning, watching her daughter's shoulders tremble as she walked through the gates. That afternoon, when Isabel climbed back into the car, she didn't say anything, just gave a tiny nod. Becky smiled to herself, thinking, that's enough. One quiet afternoon, Isabel asked, "Mom, what did I used to like?" Becky froze, then smiled softly. "You liked to draw. You loved red cactus flowers. And you once told me you wanted to be a teacher." Isabel stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded firmly. "I'll study. To become a teacher." Becky pulled her into a long, quiet embrace. That year, on April 20th, 10 years to the day since Isabel disappeared, Becky laid a bouquet of white flowers at the gates of her old elementary school. Tucked inside was a handwritten note, "Welcome home, Isabel. I love you." Isabel stood beside her silently, her hands buried in her jacket pockets. She crouched, touched the flowers lightly, then looked up, her eyes meeting Becky's. No words were spoken. But Becky understood. That night, Becky pinned a new photo to the living room wall, the two of them standing together in front of the school, Tucson sunlight lighting their hair, the wind catching just right. The old photo, Isabel at 6, she tucked into a frame and placed gently on the table. Becky murmured, "That little girl is gone. But my daughter is here." Outside the window, Tucson streetlights spilled soft yellow onto the quiet street. In the little bedroom, Becky sat on the edge of Isabel's bed, watching her sleep. The girl lay curled up, dark brown hair fanned across the pillow, her face finally peaceful, lips softly moving through the innocence of dreams. Becky leaned down, kissing the freckles on her nose, the same constellation that had led her through 8 endless years to find her daughter again. She whispered, "I promise.
I'll never leave you.
No matter what. I'll be right here." The desert wind slipped through the cracked open window, carrying the faint scent of creosote blossoms, like a quiet whisper, "You're home."